Welcome, everyone. My name is Audrey Kitagawa, and I am the founder and president of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. It is such a privilege to introduce Dr. David Korten, an influential prophetic voice for civilizational transformation. Dr. Korten will take us on an intriguing journey from a small town in the northwestern United States to distant lands and share how he arrived at his distinctive insights about the well-being of mankind. Dr. Korten now advocates for deep transformation to bring forth a new civilization devoted to the love of life to replace the pseudo-civilization devoted to the love of money.
Family, community, and nature framed much of my early years. All are defining themes of an ecological civilization grounded in a recognition of the interdependence of life on which a viable human future depends. My dad devoted his life to building a successful small-town business that served the community in which I grew up. And it's interesting, he loved making money, and some might think of him as a dedicated capitalist. But he lived by a mantra that he often repeated, one rarely associated with capitalism as we now know it. If you are not in business to serve your customers, you have no business being in business. His customers and the community in which we lived were one and the same, and he served them both in a great many ways. I remember a night many years ago. It was after business hours. His store was closed. We were sitting at our dinner table as a family, enjoying the meal together. The phone rang. It was a call from a customer, a guitar player with a local gig that night. He had lost his guitar pick. That's an item that back then might have sold for maybe 5 cents. Dad got up from dinner. He drove to the store. He got his customer a guitar pick, and he returned home to finish his by then cold dinner. He was very successful, but his business model was not about maximizing profit. It was about maximizing service to our community. In return, the business provided our family with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. So I learned in my youth that profit is essential for a business to survive. But money is not a proper purpose for a business or a life. And a competition to excel in serving your community is very different from competing to make money at the expense of your neighbor. That's what my dad taught me. I grew up with conservative political views and was deeply fearful of the communist revolutions then sweeping the world. To my eyes, they presented a mortal threat to the middle-class American way of life that I so loved. These revolutions were not a defining issue for me at the time, but they were at the back of my mind as I was preparing in college to run the family business. To graduate with a BA degree, Stanford required students to take a 2-unit course outside their major. One caught my eye. It was on modern revolutions. I learned that contemporary revolutions are driven by the hardships of poverty in a world that promises prosperity, but often fails to deliver. I was so taken with this insight that I called my parents to tell them I would not be returning home to take eventual responsibility for the family business. I had decided to devote my life to ending poverty. I would go to Africa, Asia, and Latin America to share the secrets of U.S. success as a middle-class democracy with a capitalist economy. It was a moment when the middle class was thriving in the United States, and I was more than a little naive. Well, basically, I lost my innocence. The actual consequence of the so-called economic development that I observed in Africa, Latin America, and Asia was extreme and growing inequality, decimation of the middle class, and disruption of Earth's capacity to sustain life. The drivers of the devastation were not community-owned businesses like my father's. They were global corporations devoted to the exploitation of people and nature to grow already obscenely large fortunes at the expense of democracy, the middle class, and the well-being of people and Earth. I had been deceived by fraudulent economics, as had most of the world.
So-called developed countries would not be where they were if it wasn't for free labor, free resources, and so on, so on, so on, that they took from countries like Namibia, and many others across the world. So we need to all acknowledge that aid is not coming from the Western world to Africa. It never has, never. Aid is coming from Africa to the Western world. The Western world would not be able to survive not even a year without Africa.
It was in the late 1980s. I was becoming ever more conscious of the basic premise of the development economists who shaped the policies of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other international development agencies. They viewed the world through a financial lens that allowed them to see only flows and pools of money. So they considered the labor of people who meet their own needs directly with no need for an exchange of money, for example, by growing their own food, to be economically irrelevant. But wait, the purpose of the economy is not to make money, it is to meet people's needs. At least that's what most of us think. I vividly recall a meeting with a group of Harvard development economists discussing the Korean development miracle. They reported that Korean agriculture makes no consequential contribution to Korean development because it only feeds the Korean people. That seemed a bit odd. Farmers who work their own land to feed their families might be well-fed, happy, and healthy. But within a limited perspective of a development economist, they contribute nothing to GDP. And because they have little income, they are classified as living in absolute poverty. But you remove that farmer from the land, family, and community, put him or her to work for a pittance in a sweatshop or on a corporate farm, and you've developed the economy. A development economist will applaud the increase in GDP and credit economic development with lifting one more person from absolute poverty. This is the obscenity that characterizes much of what conventional economists consider economic success. How can these money numbers put an intelligent species on a suicidal path to self-extinction? I assure you I have given that question a lot of thought. It actually became something of an obsession for me back in November 1992, when I participated with leaders of 6 major Asian non-governmental organizations in a 10-day retreat in Baguio, a mountain resort in the Philippines. We had all worked together for several years and shared a belief that the so-called Asian development miracle, then much touted by the World Bank and free market economists, was more illusion than reality. Beneath the surface appearance of dynamic competitive economies in South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore was a wider Asian reality of impoverishment and spreading disruption of the region's social and ecological foundations. We noted that economic development was monetizing relationships once based on a sense of mutual caring and obligation between people and the land on which their livelihoods had depended for many thousands of years. One evening, as we gathered after dinner to continue our discussion, an image emerged reminiscent of the classical horror movie, The Blob. It was a vision of money spreading out across the Asian countryside, consuming life to grow money everywhere it touched. But how could that be? Money's just a number. It has meaning only in the human mind. It has no substance, no body, no awareness, no will. Yet it seems to be driven to consume life, to reproduce itself. Wow. I puzzled on this for days. Eventually the answer hit me. We have created a world in which money has become our means of access to everything we need and want. Water, food, a place to live, entertainment, even love. What could be more valuable than money? And yet it is ephemeral. If you're a financial trader speculating on financial bubbles, it can appear or disappear in an instant. You can never be sure you have enough. Furthermore, it will buy only that which already exists and is available for purchase. It's worthless if you're stranded on a desert island, and it will be worthless on a dead earth. Our problem resides not in the numbers we call money, it resides in the power of those who possess those numbers over those who do not. That power has so focused our attention on growing and acquiring those numbers that we fail to care for that on which our well-being, indeed our existence, depends. The air, the waters, the soil, the trees, the bees, even the microbes in our gut, and one another. We rarely ask, where does my food come from? Who does the work of growing, harvesting, and getting my food to me? Who keeps the soil healthy? Are there owners who just collect rent along the way while providing no actual service? Who gets the greater reward? The workers or the rentiers? Now, if you control access to land, water, and money, you rule the world. That control, that power to rule the world is concentrating in the hands of ever fewer people who are extracting ever more profit while providing ever less in return. Consequently, life is getting ever harder for ever more people on a dying earth. If this pattern continues, ultimately, there will be no survivors. This is the path of the love of money, the path to human self-extinction. I was beginning to see this basic truth when in 1991, I visited in India with Smithu Kothari, a leading Indian intellectual and activist who has now passed. Smithu had become a close friend and colleague. I mentioned to him that Fran and I had come to so love Asia that we were thinking of spending the rest of our lives there. And he responded, "You and Fran came here from the United States to help us, and we appreciate that. But you've since learned what our real problem is. If you really want to help us, now you need to return home and share what you have learned here with other Americans." Wow. Smithu's message hit home. In 1992, Fran and I returned to the United States and settled in New York City in an apartment near Union Square between Wall Street and Madison Avenue. Once back home, I began to see the same forces that were devastating lives in Asia, Africa, and Latin America were also devastating lives in the United States and elsewhere in the so-called developed world. The United States has never been a middle-class democracy. It was launched as an aristocracy of white male owners of land stolen from Native Americans and worked by slaves and underpaid laborers to whom the system gave few or no options. The book I had returned to the United States to write became When Corporations Rule the World. Launched at the precise moment that many people around the world were awakening to the dangers of corporate power, that book became an international bestseller translated into numerous languages.
Amazingly, 69 of the world's 100 largest economies are transnational corporations. And those transnational corporations have just the ultimate reason for their being is simply to grow value for their shareholders, which means consuming the earth at an ever faster pace and basically turning human beings into zombie consumers. So this story, of course, as we all know so well, has led to what's now the greatest inequality in history, where the most recent statistics are that now the wealthiest 26 billionaires own as much wealth as the entire half of the world's entire population.
Government is not the problem. The problem is a failed system that leaves us overly dependent on intrusive government to limit the abuse of corporate power and to clean up the messes such abuse creates. The goal is not to regulate profit-maximizing monopolies, it is to eliminate them. The goal is a world in which every business is owned by people who depend on it for their means of living. The system we seek will minimize the need for people to turn to government to save them from the hardships imposed by the failed system of business under which we now live. In 1997, a slight woman of apparent Chinese ancestry approached me at an international conference. She introduced herself as Dr. Meiwan Ho. She said, "My work may be relevant to your work."
The reason I went into university was because I wanted to know literally what life means, what makes life. That was my burning question. I was a molecular geneticist until I found out that it was just the same old reductionist science, and it wasn't going to tell me what life was about. I'd like to understand nature as a romantic poet, as well as a scientist and artist.
Meiwan went on to point out that the human body, this vessel of our consciousness and vehicle of our agency, is a higher order community of tens of trillions of interdependent, regenerating, decision-making living cells and microorganisms engaged in a continuing self-managed exchange of nutrients, water, energy, and information. Now, it's all rather obvious when pointed out, but I'd never heard it put that way before. And it turns out, actually, that neither had most biologists. I was fascinated. Meiwan took me ever deeper into a recognition of life's essential features. It was, for me, a truly mind-altering experience. I have never since seen the world in quite the same way. The exchanges between our body's cells are mediated by our heart, lungs, liver, brain, and other organs, which are themselves communities of living beings. Each of these cells is itself continuously regenerating through life's eternal cycles of death and birth and rebirth. Yet, at the same time, each is performing its essential duties in relationship to the whole of my body. And of course, a functioning body is not self-contained. It depends on my body's continuing exchange with the larger community of life on which I depend for food, water, air, a stable climate, waste recycling, and companionship. I exist because the bees pollinate, the trees produce oxygen, the beetles decompose soil, the microbes digest the food in my gut and recycle my waste, and there are people who love and care for me as I love and care for them. All levels in the community of life are continuously regenerating through distinctive cycles of birth, life, and death, continuously adapting, learning, and evolving together. Ultimately, we get to the living Earth, a planet that over billions of years has learned to create and maintain the distinctive surface conditions on which all of life as we know it depends. Now, life clearly involves competition with deadly consequences for select individuals, But look beneath the surface and you find extraordinary cooperation, which many of our ancestors recognized even without the aid of the scientific instruments now available to us.
The mother continent, nature, which is our mother, taught us how to be human. And nature is interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. Ubuntu is a way of life where spiritual, mental, emotional, physical are connected. The core values of Ubuntu: self-respect, respect for others, reverence for nature, and reciprocity, to know that you cannot live alone. As we say in my language, umtu ungumtu gabantu. A person's personhood is only meaningful if it is affirmed by others.
Ubuntu, which translates, I am because you are. This one word, it takes 5 in English, wondrously summarizes the implications of the complex reality that contemporary science now confirms. Caring for one another and nature is not only a sound ethical principle, it is the essential foundation of our existence. Humanity's current crisis is a consequence of forgetting what our earliest ancestors learned and understood from their daily experience. Ubuntu, I am because you are. All of you, the whole of life. That means that my well-being depends on your well-being. Therefore, it is in the interest of each of us to cooperate to increase the well-being of all. Once you begin viewing life as deeply cooperative rather than brutally competitive, it shines a wholly new light on the human experience in relation to our human possibility. I began exploring the implications, along with a great many wonderful colleagues, leading up to the publication of The Great Turning in 2006. That book's focus is on humanity's most recent 5,000 years, what we might call the imperial era. It is the era when the most uncivil among us gained the power to declare themselves civilized and declare those they sought to dominate as uncivilized. The Great Turning from Empire to Earth Community brought together the insights emerging from the many discussions in which I was then involved to frame a vision of human possibility, what we now call an ecological civilization.
Got to build the alternatives, the new ways of doing things, the new institutions. And these, I'm telling you, they are sprouting up now at a phenomenal rate. Probably there has been no time in human history where so many new ways of doing things and old is reaching back before the Industrial Growth Society into old wisdom, earth wisdom traditions, and indigenous wisdom. There's probably no time in human history where these new ways have sprouted so fast. And I say sprouted, I see them coming up like sprouts amidst the rubble of a dysfunctional civilization.
So a few years ago, I tried to draw a picture, because I love drawing pictures. I tried to draw a picture of the world that we want to live in. And it, silly though it sounds, it came out looking like a donut. So imagine a donut, there's the outside, and then there's the inside, and there's that hole in the middle. In the hole in the middle, that's a space of deprivation, a space of shortfall where people don't have the resources to meet the essentials of life, like they don't have enough food or education, they don't have access to electricity, enough income, they don't have decent housing. So it's a space of shortfall, and we want to get people out of that hole in the middle into the donut. But we want to do that for the whole world, making sure that we also don't go beyond the donut's outer crust, because that's a space of ecological overshoot where humanity puts more pressure on the planet than the planet can take, and we start causing climate change or massive loss of biodiversity. We start creating a hole in the ozone layer or polluting Earth with chemicals that we add to it. So we need to both get people out of deprivation and poverty, but also protect Earth and protect these fundamental life-supporting systems that keep us alive. Those are the two sides of human well-being, the inside and the outside of the donut. And the 21st century challenge is a unique one. It's to get everybody out of poverty while coming back in at the same time. That's never been taken on before. And that's partly why we need to rewrite economics, because it's a completely new way of looking at what human well-being is.
You have to have a vision of a different kind of economy, a vision of an economy that by its very nature delivers sustainability and broad-based prosperity. We use the phrase community wealth building, which is a broad umbrella that says, let's build community wealth as the purpose of economic activity and economic development. And within that, you have social enterprise, you have employee ownership, you have locally owned banks or community development financial institutions. So the institutions are part of a broader framework which says it's all aimed at building community wealth and the pieces work together. I mean, ownership structures, property, and who holds it is at the foundation of every economy. So if we want a different kind of economy, we have to get the assets in different hands. That's fundamental.
We are accustomed to turning to economics for mental images to guide us to mutual prosperity. But our current economics is not a true economics. It is an egonomics with 4 fatal flaws. It ignores the needs of life and evaluates our relationships and progress by purely financial metrics like growing GDP and financial assets. It accepts the concentration of power in monopolistic transnational corporations, shielded from the moderating influence of market forces and far removed from community accountability. It assumes that competition rather than cooperation is our dominant human mode of relating. It ignores, even denies, our essential human responsibilities to one another and Earth. This egonomics is less a science than a religion devoted to the worship and love of money. It bears major responsibility for our current crisis. It cannot lead us out of the crisis for which it bears major responsibility. To reclaim our full humanity, we must liberate ourselves from the love of money. To guide us in that quest, we need a vision of a world devoted to the love of life, consistent with the teachings of the world's most revered religious teachers, the Ubuntu wisdom of our ancient ancestors, and our current findings of science. Economics is devoted to our love and care for life. It recognizes that 1, life exists only in diverse communities of living beings that self-organize to create and maintain the conditions essential to their individual and collective well-being. 2, once our basic needs are met, true human happiness and well-being depends on being more, not having more. 3, the proper purpose of human institutions is to support us in relating to one another and nature in ways consistent with our long-term well-being. And 4, we humans are by nature fundamentally cooperative beings who get our greatest satisfaction from being helpful to one another. The economics of an ecological civilization will be devoted to the study of the structures and management of all our major human institutions, religion, education, and government and business, and their distinctive roles and contributions to shaping our human choices. Remember my story about my dad, the businessman, interrupting his dinner to get a customer a 5-cent guitar pick? That wasn't just a missing pick. This was so a neighbor could make his living bringing members of our community together to enjoy an evening of music. Dad's business was about making life better for his community, his family, and ultimately himself. We now seek new ways of living and being as caring communities devoted to life's well-being and continuing evolution within the larger scheme of creation's continued unfolding. Our future viability as a species depends on our ability to reshape our relationships with one another and Earth through ethically grounded choices relating to culture, institutions, technology, and infrastructure consistent with the well-being of all people and the living Earth that birthed and nurtures us. There is much pain ahead, yet an ultimately positive outcome is possible because the primary barriers reside only in the human mind. It is possible, and it is consistent with our deeper human nature. We are living beings born to love and care for life. The time is now, the choice is ours, for the love of life.